William, are you there?
I certainly am.
Hi, I called you a guest, but maybe I should call you co-host, huh?
Well, just don't call me late for breakfast.
Okay, well, everything seems to be set.
Okay, since I'm unscheduled, I'm going to mute and pop off. Nice to talk to you guys. Sorry.
Thanks for helping me
Glad
out.
I could
The
help.
thing, kept disconnecting me, so I don't know what's going on there, but thanks a lot, JJ.
Absolutely. All right, bye-bye.
Okay, so last week, William, I talked about a false flag operation. I explained a little bit the different false flag operations that have been in the past. And I said that the understanding of a false flag operation basically leads you to an understanding of solution problem reaction, the dialectic, and how that works. And that it is very important for people to understand how that works so that they know how they have been led by the nose. But today, we are going to jump a little bit to a different idea, avenue, level, whatever you want to call it. And we're going to talk a little bit about ideas. I believe there was a Chinese saying that went something like, normal people talk about people, then there are those that talk about events, and then there are those that talk about ideas. Something that was like that.
Yes, nice, nice. Yeah, well, there are those kinds of things, and certainly when you look at the dialectic, altogether too often we think about the Hegelian dialectic being the end-all, be-all of the concept. If you start off with a thesis and then an antithesis and a synthesis, but as you mentioned with the false flags, we always begin with the synthesis, and then we build the thesis and the antithesis that gets us there. But there are other things going on, and certainly I don't get the opportunity nearly enough to talk with someone that has studied philosophy as well as you have, that might be able to understand and appreciate some of the things that occupy my mind outside of the day-to-day grind. And like you, I have a really hard time rationalizing life as on the normal plane. There are many things that I not only am skilled at but enjoy doing that have nothing whatsoever to do with, as you say, making radio, talking on these various topics. And yet, the lateness of the hour and the direness of the situation compels me to come to the radio every single morning, 5 days a week on the Oracle Broadcasting Network, and do 2 hours of talk radio on a great variety of topics. And somewhat, I hope, like your broadcast will be here, one of the things that I like to do is style my broadcast as an internet homeschool classroom, maybe Mad Men only, or the room or the home of philosophical radicalism, because ideas are going to really be where we need to focus our attention. We get swept away with all of the symptoms. We get swept away examining and wringing our handkerchiefs, excuse me, over all of the victims. And yet we allow the disease to run rampant, and the disease is a very important concept. We need to understand that as good physicians, we need to cure the diseases that are besetting mankind, and we need to do it, as I like to say, in a New York minute, because we're going to perish, in this process. So one of the things that I'd suggested as a possibility to look at would be to think on the lines of time and space, think along the lines of intelligence and as opposed to intuition. Think from the standpoint of discontinuity and unity, and to think for a bit and talk a little bit about the difference between linear and circular. And in this process, I think that we might be able to maybe even with the callers and the chatters, bring out some of these aspects that make up the dialectic of life, of some of the difference between being an inanimate object and being an animate object, the difference somewhat of between being a flesh and blood creature, an animal, if you will, and other humans and other animals, and the vegetation, the vegetable, the idea of being able to understand where does our intelligence come from, and what is it, and what is intuition, and do we have access to both? Is there a cross-brain barrier between intuition and intelligence? And maybe some of these tools would help us if we think about it from the standpoint of discontinuity and unity. What is that, and how does that impact the way we live? And then, of course, linear versus circular. We're always running things in lines. And so these are some areas that I'd like to talk about if we have time today.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to take calls, as the server keeps telling me that I'm not allowed to access it. But the chat room is certainly there. You can go there via the website, micro1650am.com, and clicking on Solvinur Radio. That's basically the name of the event that I have here. I have, as you said, studied philosophy, but not in a sense that I went to school or read so many books about it. But I did spend a lot of time talking to other philosophers. I did a lot of times doing my own philosophy, which basically started as a child. And I wondered why other children did not have the same questions, basically. And so the ideas of time and space and the whole thing that we got listed in our email, they're basically so big that I don't think we will be able to just scratch the surface of these in the time available, because it's too broad, so to speak.
Well, it is a large plate. There's no doubt about it. But if we could just start out and do something really simple and think of it from the standpoint. Let's see, am I hearing music?
Yeah, that's our break music.
All right, very good. Let's go ahead and do that.
Yeah, this is Orion. And welcome back, everybody. This is Orion Talk Radio on Micro 1650 AM. You can call us at 716-213-6816. I am your host, Walter. This is the event Solvinur Radio. It's every Sunday. Today I have a guest/co-host, Willaim Roberts. Welcome back, William.
Thank you for having me back. And really, thanks for inviting me, Saul. I'm really glad that you're on the Orion Network these days.
Thank you. Where did the break cut you off?
Well, we just got in. I was just about to open up the discussion a little bit on time and space. And, sometimes you can go, real deep on things, and sometimes you can touch it lightly. And that's really what I want to do. But we've got enough time to go into it. So, we think about time. Time is one of the things today that people, we live for thousands and thousands of years without a wristwatch. We live for a long time, where 90% of the people on the planet or more, probably 99% of the people that we would consider to be man or woman, didn't even have a sundial, and yet they knew the seasons. They used other yardsticks, but we live now in a time that is we're like in hyperdrive, where this computerized IT hubbub people. We don't have time to eat breakfast because we have to take the children here and then rush to an office there and then rush over here and pick somebody up for an afternoon or luncheon meeting, and then back to the office, and then over here and off to the weight gym, and then swoop by and pick up the children and rush them off to McDonald's, and then take them over and go to a game of some sort or another in the evening, and then back, and then do an evening meeting, and then try and go out with the wife, and then come back in. It's just insanity.
And gone is the time.
It's insanity, and so we live in a time for madmen only. So there's time, but when we think about time, oftentimes we are not really thinking about it. It's a bit of an illusion, and it really it's one of those sort of things that if you live as I did for over a dozen years in a little cabin by yourself in an Ozark holler, down near the grass and the trees and the oak and the limestone and the running water and the deer and the antelope play, you start to understand that there's something else going on that we're not aware of. And so with time, I came up with this idea that there are three basic things that are requirements that are necessary to understand or comprehend time, the very first and foremost is an observer. There has to be someone that's observing. Otherwise, time, who cares? It's all it is, the Earth spinning on its axis, the moon whipping about us, the planet flying around the sun, and who cares? It could be the sun, it could be an atom, it could be a neutron, it could be whatever, a photon, a piece of dust floating, a mote of dust floating across a cloakroom in somebody else's, time and zone and space and all that. So time really, number one, it all depends upon an observer to try and to pull it out of the illusion and bring it in and make some kind of sense out of it. Another very important thing to understand is that the observer can change. Time for one observer may not be the same as time for another observer. And by that I mean that the observer has the ability to select the second criteria. The second criteria is that there needs to be a unit of measure. Time is just an illusion if you don't have a unit of measure, and that means that if you are basing time on the sun rises or the moon rises, or whether you're basing it on the time that the moon goes new, and in other words, looking at it from a lunar calendar standpoint, if you're looking at it from the time of the seasons or the time that plants come or go, or maybe you mark time by the time the first buffalo comes into the field of view each year, or if you mark time by who is born or who dies. All of these things are units of measure that not only have been used in the past, but they can be used successfully to measure time.
Yeah, in the ancient times, the moon calendar was used even before there was a sun calendar. And so the observance of time is an ancient tradition, yes. And today, we even have leftovers from that, like 60 minutes, and the 12 hours, they go back to Egyptian times and before that.
Exactly, and so these are units of measure. And now people altogether too often, when they start traveling down this path, the great mystery religions and things like that, sometimes they get caught up more in the symbolism than in the idea that it lies behind it, So
you have to pinch through the symbols first to understand them.
Yes, and understand that the symbols exist in multiple layers. That the symbols some symbols are for the layman, if you will, and some are for the priest class, and they're not necessarily understood or discussed in the same light. So first you've got the observer, and as I said, the observer can change. There's nothing fixed about the observer. The second thing is that there needs to be a unit of measure. And the unit of measure, as I mentioned, can change. But one of the problems is that if there is a change in the unit of measure, the observer is incumbent upon the observer to hand or pass down the unit of measure to the next generation. Otherwise, time reverts right back to an illusion again. You see what I'm saying? So you have to agree on a unit of measure and then stick to it, and then you need to keep alive the memory of that unit of measure. Another element that's absolutely necessary for the illusion of time to be worthy of study is that there needs to be a beginning and there needs to be an end. And this is going to be very important. And that's why you'll see, like in the Bible, the writings of the Hebrew, the idea is in the beginning. There's a beginning. And then you look at the book of John the Revelator, and this is the apocalypse. There's your end. All right? And it's divided into 66 books, and it's supposed to tell the story from the beginning to the end. And in that context, then you have a system of time, and you have a system of measurement, units of measure. You have a beginning and an end. And in that relationship, we have time that actually has some meaning or some bearing. But let's not forget that we can change the observer. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the beginning and the end. Of course, the first one, the observer, is also very interesting because who or what is the observer here? But there is something between the beginning and the end, and that is the now. And the now cannot be grabbed and say, well, here's now. you know what I mean? It's always gone, you know?
Yeah, well, one of the ways that I like to style that, Saul, is that, we very carefully research our past. I mean, it's just, I don't know whether everybody that does radio is just an amateur historian or not, but we all seem to be very carefully going, what happened, So we search our past, and we do a real good job, the best we can. And some people go into it in the nth detail. They'll study all of the original tongues and languages and the tribes and the creeds and the traditions. But we carefully research the past. And then we look into the future and go, there's got to be a way out of this madness, And so we look at the future and we think, well, what would it be like if? That's kind of like everyone sitting around the campfire dreaming. But life for us, we climb up on this, up onto this diving platform, up onto the diving board, and we're out there. We've got all of our research done behind us, and then we rush out to the end of the diving board and leap up and come down, and we hit the board and we come off the end of our board. But all of our life is spent at that moment in that falling forward into the future.
Yeah. It's I thought about those too, but in my idea, future and past, they don't really have to exist. There will always be now. So in that sense, time is also obsolete. Exactly. We're going into a little break again, 2 or 3 minutes or something. We will be right back, people. This is Mike, Orion Talk Radio. I'm your host, Walter. Today I have a guest, Willaim Roberts. And we also have a Skype call-in. I wanted to join the show, and he's welcome. Hi, James.
Hey, Saul. Hi, Will. How you doing, guys?
Excellent. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad I could be helping this morning. Now, you guys were talking about time, and that's really a fascinating subject because you start thinking about time almost as soon as you realize yourself as a baby. As soon as you start recognizing yourself in the mirror, you start recognizing time, and time is relative. You know what I mean? Time doesn't pass at the same rate for every person, even though the clock may, you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Yeah, it always goes back. Yes, right, Saul. It always goes back to the observer.
Yeah.
Yeah, because let me tell you, there's people in prison right now that time is just, well, really, to them, relative to them, to where they are, time is slower because they notice each passing minute almost.
Oh, yes, absolutely. We had this gaming class. We were about 5th grade or something, and we had this clock hanging in the wall. And the teacher said, "Now everybody look at the clock for 1 minute." And everybody was looking at the clock for 1 minute, and then he said, "Now have some fun for 1 minute." And everybody was like having fun for 1 minute, and we were like astonished, like, huh, have fun, what's this? And he stopped us real soon to our feeling, right? Because the time looking at the clock was like ages.
I know.
Compared to the having fun, yeah.
Well, so this is part of the discussion then, is that time, it really is a very important thing, but we seldom actually contemplate. We never sit back and think about time itself. And then we add into that layer the idea of space, okay, time and space, and bringing those two into it together. If you can think about it from the standpoint of adding to that scale, things really start to get interesting in a hurry. Time has a meaning and an importance, of course, for us because we feel or we experience life, and that we understand space in that we're always bumping into things that are also in our space and or being impacted by things that are also in our space. But it's only important, really for human beings because we're occupying this particular little film on top of this one particularly polished ball that seems to be able to support what we consider to be life operating inside of space in what we call a solar system, inside of a galaxy, inside of the universe. And so all of these things are absolutely relative in understanding, and some of this, is known to those that are on high, and some of it is not. The people that are rushing around the planet seeking whom they can devour this week, they're living in this weird agitation of consciousness that forbids them to be able to live in the world of idea, and they're always locked in the world of action.
Yeah.
You know, so then we've got this idea then of space, but if we start to go back down and begin at an understanding of the development or the evolution, not from let's say a Lamarckian or a Darwinian or a Dalton, but from the standpoint of the emergence of life forms from the lowest, if you will, to the highest of the various forms. If we go back and start and look at that and think about it from the standpoint of space, we can take some one thing, you know, let's like take the pineal gland or take a liver or take a kidney, and you've got this idea, this concept that's floating. Now, it has absolutely no bearing whatsoever if it's not inserted into the body in the right place. I mean, we've got livers floating around in space, and they're looking for a body, you know. We've got brains over here and brains over there. Some are bigger and some are smaller, and they're looking for the right cranium to get into, you know.
Yeah.
So objects in space then are another aspect of this, and it goes into, as we talked about, the idea of intelligence and intuition. When intelligence is something that has developed and or was a gift, if you will, of man and all animals, okay? And we have to, some might want to question how much of a gift it was, but intelligence is this thing where we look at, let's say, ideas, and we become little factories. We think about what we can make, but we're taking something, let's say we take a tree standing, and we see the tree standing, and then we have ideas about what we could do with the tree standing if the tree wasn't standing. And so we learn how to cut the tree down. Or a tree standing, and we see a tree standing, and then we see a tree that has fallen down, and we can see the tree has fallen down has been more useful to us than the tree standing. All right?
Yeah.
And so time and space is broken up into these concepts. The concept of tree down and tree up, and the idea of firewood, building materials, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. Those are not intuition. They are part of intelligence.
Yeah, I guess I'm maybe mixing up the ideas of intelligence and intuition, but I have a rather different idea with what intelligence is. Maybe you've heard me say this before, William. This is from mythology. And it's older than Greek, but you find it back in the Greek idea of elements also. You got the earth, water, fire, and air, right? Mm-hmm. But it's basically from an ancient Sanskrit text, which I will partly speak here. And it goes earth, water, fire, air. Those are the four basic ones everybody knows. But there's a fifth. They call it ether, or it is translated as ether. And then there's three more they call the not gross material but fine material, and they belong in their philosophy. And I'm not saying it's my philosophy, but it's just interesting to look at.
Yes.
And it's in their philosophy there's just three other elements, so to speak, and they call it mind, intelligence, and ego. And especially the order in which they appear is of importance, because the intelligence is controlling the mind, and the ego is controlling the intelligence. That's why it's put in that way. And so intelligence, but James, go ahead.
Well, then let me ask you a question. Which comes first? All right.
Yeah.
When an egg is fertilized, okay. Yeah. And a fetus begins to grow.
Yeah.
All right. It's generally been accepted throughout the eons that, or believed that during about the 13th week of the trimester, or the 13th week of the pregnancy, that the soul enters the body. I mean, now the soul would be what you were just talking about. That the soul is what has what contains consciousness, your actual self-awareness.
Well, you could say that, yeah, in their philosophy, the soul is the source of consciousness, yes.
Okay.
It doesn't contain it. It's just a property that a living being has. But the elements
so the energy has always been there, and it takes about 13 weeks for the vessel to receive it.
Well, I don't think you can.
That's highly questionable. It would work really well if you wanted to argue for at what point does life come in. I would say that the spark, having raised lots and lots of chickens and gone through this process, I would say that the spark of life happens as soon as the egg is fertilized. If the hen is never visited by the rooster, it's not going to be a fertile egg. As soon as the hen is visited by the rooster, you have fertile eggs, and that egg is going to be fertile. And if you could care for it, it's going to come all the way to the hen. I would say that the very moment that, again, that the sperm and the egg join, you've got life.
Yeah, indeed, I think so too.
That's the very instant that the cell multiply.
It's like a nuclear reaction. You have one element that merges in with the other element, and from that precise moment, all the way up to that moment, you don't have life. You have an infertile egg, but from that moment forward, you're definitely dealing with life.
Yeah, but intelligence is... Yeah, okay, well, I'm just going to say something about intelligence, but I think I hear the break. It has something to do with how good you can repeat the things you are taught in school. Because a bird, for instance, also knows exactly how to build a nest. And when to receive the man's sperm, because she knows best when it's time to lay her eggs. She's perfectly adapted, and I sense that there is intelligence in there. They're not stupid animals that just walk around like a head without a chicken. You catch my drift there, William, or do you think that has something more to do with intuition?
Well, there is a certain instinct that comes in that, and intuition and instinct are not actually synonymous, but they're very closely related. Okay. So intelligence again. Then in this thing with time and space, intelligence is something that it's like the faculty of manufacturing artificial objects, to use a phrase. All right, and they can be artificial objects that actually are physical. Then there are also artificial objects that are without body, ephemeral. And so let's use two simple things. One of them, let's say, would be a saw. All right, that's a very highly complex system, of manufacture to get there. The faculty that to create the artificial object of a saw, but at the same time, you can also have something being manufactured, like going into law. Past week, I was talking about the trust, and so it's a legal tool, it's a legal construct, but it has absolutely no physical bearing. Are you with me? So when we talk about manufacturing tools, sometimes the tools are physical, sometimes they are not. And the idea, again, is through this evolutionary process, again, not necessarily to give any weight or credence to Darwin, but to just simply say that we add one onto another. I guess going back to time and space again, we could back up and start a little better and understand along this wise. Everyone out there that's listening, I know most people are looking at the computer screen or something, but if they had a piece of paper and were pencil and paper addicts like I am, you might just take a blank sheet of paper, all right? Now, when you take a blank sheet of paper, this is no thing. If you're looking at it just from the standpoint of a blank piece of paper, it's waiting for something. But there's no thing. But there is no thing. And so what I like to do is I like to begin creation. In the beginning, God said, just use the Bible, something, and then something happens. So it comes from no thing to something. If there were anything prior to creation, then it would presuppose a prior creation. Are you with me? If there was a multitude, if there was a multitude of God or a host of gods prior to creation, then it would presuppose a prior creation of gods, and so on. So I like to start with.
Well, there's a way out.
Hold on.
There's a way out of there, William.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear this.
Yeah, there may be, but from no thing, something. All right, so you start with a blank piece of paper. So you start with a blank piece of paper. Now, in the piece of paper, and of course, children will do this automatically. Put a dot in the center of the piece of paper. You know, you could give a young person a sheet of butcher paper, 24 by 36, and they immediately start drawing in the middle of the paper. Very few will draw on the edge or a corner. You know, so just right in the middle of the paper, you put a dot. Okay, now you've got something, and so then draw a line, basically a ray that runs through that dot from one side to the other. Now we've started to go into this idea of linear. All right? And this is something that is just about hardwired into the mind of man today because of our education. We start thinking in lines as opposed to circles. But it would be
so let me ask you, just before you... So the thought of always was and always will be, I mean, that right there is the one thing that... When you're talking about linear and nonlinear time that most people have the most trouble with, is how can something have always been and always will be?
There's only that might exist in a no thing existence. It wouldn't be something that could exist in a something existence.
Yes, and the Western way, I guess, to say that is that the no thing existence is a non-material.
Yes.
Consciousness, and the thing existence is a material consciousness.
Exactly. In the Greek had it, or in Latin, it's like, and I may misspeak on this, but I think it's ubi materia, that's where there is matter. Ubi geometria, that's there is geometry.
Yeah.
And ibi mysteria, where there is matter, there is geometry, and where they exist, there is mystery. And that's the core of the mystery religions in those three phrases. So, and this is how we have come to understand the world the way we see it, because we're seeing it. If we didn't have sight, we would probably be more interested in the no thing than in the something.
Yeah, there's an enormous relationship between seeing and intelligence also.
Correct. And again, this goes back to the intelligence in the creation of man and animals, is that we have the ability with the intelligence to manufacture artificial objects.
So there's intelligence without consciousness, or can be. Intelligence exists without consciousness.
I wouldn't take away the consciousness. There may be intelligence without form.
Right. Well, I'm talking strictly human, though. That I suppose when you talk about consciousness, how many animals do you think have actual conscious?
Well,
not like they realize they did something wrong. I mean, they realize.
No. That's another thing. That has to do with conditioning. But that's a wrong view of what consciousness is. Okay. Consciousness is everywhere where life is. So even a tree has a consciousness, although it's sleeping. It's usually not there, so to speak. It's too deep down in the earth to notice anything. It's all wrapped up in itself. So you could say it has a very low consciousness, but because it's alive, there is consciousness there.
Okay.
Well, again, this is this distinction between intelligence and the intuition and the instinct. The tree has chemical processes going, and like you say, there is a consciousness or an intelligence that's dormant in that. But what it is running primarily upon is the intuition, and the instinct of being a tree. Yeah. And it's not in the process necessarily of manufacturing artificial objects. It's existing in life and part of the greater community of life, if we will. But it is not from the standpoint of animal. It's in the vegetative. And vegetative and animal are distinctions that need carefully be drawn, because we'll find a lot of similarities between the two. One of them that they don't have, except for creeping vines and things like that, they don't have the mobility. And so as a result, they have to be basically 100% of who they are and what they are, right where they are. They have no choice.
Do they know they're alive?
I don't know.
Or where does that fit in? Where does knowing that you're alive fit into all this?
That has to do with ego.
Is that what that would be considered?
That has to do with if you don't have an ego, and that's one of the higher, not gross material, but fine material elements that living beings have at their disposal. But if your consciousness does not want, or for any reason is not able to use ego, then it will not recognize itself.
Well, let's take something, take this thing apart and break it into little parts. We're coming up at the top of the hour, but you take something like some of the wasps, for instance. They know precisely where to sting their victim and where to make an incision in order to lay their egg inside of this caterpillar. And they came out of a honeycomb or something like that, and they never went to school. And yet they know from the most precise ways, they know the inner anatomy of another creature. And so it's hard to say that's intelligence. It's most likely intuition.
Okay.
And it didn't come with a toolbox, but it was built in. It was hardwired. And I think the trees exist much the same way.
And when you're talking about information that can be stored genetically, we don't even have enough computers on the planet to match the amount of information that can be stored. So, you know what I'm saying? You don't need many genes to have stored a lot. There are some people that think all information that's ever existed contains in every single point.
Well,
that may be ludicrous, but
Saul brought it up really, really well initially with the use of the word ether. There once was a time when everybody considered everything that was too fine to be discussed ether. And it's just the same today as that we're talking about the genes. But we'll get into that when we get into linear and discontinuity and unity.
Yeah, because we're coming on the top of the break. Stay tuned for the second hour of this event, people. James.
I'm sorry about that. My coffee.
Oh, that's no problem.
Tube.
Forget about it. Is there anything else you wanted to ask or add before I let you go?
No. You pretty much covered it. My main questions are about how. Sometimes I wonder if me just knowing that I'm alive and knowing that I am myself is some kind of a self-awareness. Is that part of a linear time scale, or is that something that's, everlasting, dimensional? I'm going to let you answer that off air. I'm going to hop out.
Sure.
So thanks for having me on. Thanks for taking my call, guys.
You're welcome. You want to take that, or shall I?
Well, let's go back to the little dot that we have with the line running through it.
We were there. I'll try and remember.
So we'll start with time and space and go back to that a little bit more, because I think it's going to start to answer some of these questions. So these are natural things that we do. And we do these because we've learned these, and that they're not coming from intuition. This is a learned behavior. And so we've got this dot, and we can call that the first thing in a field of no things. Mm-hmm. And then we draw a line through that, and then on the right-hand side of that line, from our education, we could extend a ray from that dot to the right, and we can go out infinitely, infinitely. In other words, it has no ending from the dot to the right. And so the first thing we learn to do as little ones is to create a number line where we just make little ticks at uniform distances apart, and we can then come back and label it 1, 2, 3, 4, and it goes on and on and on endlessly, okay, to the right. Now, we're also taught that we can go to the left of the dot and use those same little uniform units of measure and make our tick marks on that line, and then we can label them -1, -2, -3.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
X and Y axis.
Yeah, well, so much. Not X and Y. It's still linear. And X and Y would be aligned perpendicular to the line.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. I'm ahead of time.
Yeah, that's fine. So what we're basically looking at then is this idea, and we're going to begin our studies this way, and this is the way young people are taught. We're put in a box from the beginning. But if we can go, if I can teach you someone that's young the additive principle, if I can say, can you accept that this is an apple? And can you accept that these, if I take one apple and add another apple, that I have two? And if I can have two and add two more, then I have 4, and then 8 and 16 and 32 and 64 and 128 and so on infinitely. And we could build the Tower of Babel, and we could raise it right on up to heaven, right?
Yeah.
The other side of this dot, then we could say, all right, now if you can accept the additive principle, can you accept the subtractive principle? If I have 100 apples and I take away 1, do I have 99? And then 98 and so on and so forth. And so what we can also say is if I have a whole orange on the cutting board and I cut it right down the middle, I have now got 2. So we begin with 1, and you cut it in half and you have 2. You set one part aside. You cut it in half again, you have a 4th, and then an 8th, and a 16th, and a 32nd, and a 124th, and a 256, and so on, infinitely. Yeah. So from the very beginning, then we come back and look at the additive side, and we can use multiplication. If you have 2, and then 2 times 2 is 4, and 8, and 16, 32, 60, the same thing. Go the other side, and you do the same with division. Now, so what we're doing with this is looking at space from the standpoint of breaking it up into smaller and smaller pieces. Now, we mentioned, you've got the people in the East that are looking at and using terms like ether, for instance, and the Greeks did it as well. They had the fine particles and the coarse particles, okay? And that was only because they were limited in their ability to see or perceive the fineness of infinity.
Yeah.
But reality says this, that if you can accept and believe that you can actually add infinitely. In other words, if it was possible to build enough of a foundation and you continued to add bricks, you could actually build a bricks column all the way up into the Mars and beyond. And by the same token, that if you could continually cut, even though you're going to have to go to a stronger and stronger microscope and develop new objects, new tools, that the intelligence says that you can divide infinitely. Yeah. And so at this point, at this point in human development, in scientific development, we only have limited capacity. We can reach only so far to the right on our number line, and we can reach and embrace and understand and comprehend only so far to the left on our number line. But we're always working from 0. Now, let's take time and space once again and say that, all right, we can all accept that if we can believe the additive principle and if we can believe the subtractive principle, then if I'm beginning from point A, let's say that's the dot on our number line, and I'm going to move to a -4, and I'm going to put another dot on -4. Now, what's the distance? And you teach us in math. How far is it from 0, if they call it 0, a null set? How far is it from the dot on our number line to the -4? Okay, and so, well, it's 4 units. It's 4 units. Okay, we can accept that. And so we can move our pencil from the dot to the -4. Now, have we done that? Of course we've done that. So you could move from your chair to the couch. Now, you've moved from the chair to the couch. But what you've just done is the impossible. You've just proven that somehow or another there's a far greater mystery in motion than we've ever taught. Because what we've just done is we've gone through infinity. We've traveled infinitely. Now, you never, because of the subtractive and the divisive principle, you can never be at point A. And you can never arrive at point B. And so you start to develop a bell curve between the two, where actually point A is way below the line because you can continue to divide and divide and divide. You never arrive there. And you can get to point B, but you can never really get there because you can keep adding and adding and adding and adding, and the distance between is infinite. So then how then is it that we move? How is it then that the Earth travels in a circumference around the sun if it's an infinite distance? Well, there's more to understanding things than we have been led to believe, okay? There are things that our intellect, our intelligence tells us, but there are things that we can understand and perceive intuitively that make science a lie. Well, at least inaccurate. Are you with me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so with this...
Well, there's one thing I would like to add. When they taught us, as you said, at school, like 1, 2, 3, and so on, I already started to think that this system of numbers is actually, you could say that we made it up or something like that, but it seems to fit perfectly, and it also has like a 3, 4, 5 triangle. It already has certain properties in it that you wouldn't suspect if you just say, oh, well, let's invent numbers. You catch my drift?
Absolutely. And again, it goes back to this idea that where there is matter, there is geometry.
Yeah, exactly.
And where there is geometry, there is mystery. And so now all of a sudden we've just invoked, you brought it up with the idea of the XY axis. Now we have the Masonic L.
Oh?
The square. Okay? Now, let's go to the next level. So, okay, we've got this line, and we say that it can go out infinitely in either direction. But again, it has to do with scale. Where are we standing when we're looking at the line? We're standing very close to it. What we're dealing with is a segment of a much greater long line. Okay, the line is far greater than we can view or perceive. And if we really and rightly start to comprehend this, then we can understand the mystery symbols that you see, where there is a dot. And the dot is in the center of a circle. Now, the Masons come in and they stick their compass on that dot, and they circumscribe a circle around it. Are you with me?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when we're standing looking at a segment of a line, we think of it as being straight. But is it straight, or is it just a portion of the great circle? All right.
Something turned into itself.
Yes. Now, let's go back to intelligence and intuition. When we are in the intelligence game, we're standing on the circle, looking towards the center. And we can pick that up after this.
Yes, indeed. This is Orion Talk Radio. We're up for another break. We will be right. I'm your host, Walter, from the Netherlands. The call-in number, if you have any questions, is 716-213-6816. If you want to email me, you can email me at solvinur1@yahoo.com. Now, William, we were talking about the x-axis and y-axis and the shape of the L. And then, could you please start there again, because I was afraid of losing you.
Oh, that's all right. So, yes, you can have the X or Y axis, but, and you can make an X, you can create the X or the Y, in other words, creating a perpendicular through any of those points on our number line, to the left or to the right of the central point, which in itself is an enigma, in that it is no thing. It's the null set. So from no thing, something. As soon as you move away from the null set, you have something. But at any one of those places, 1, 2, 3, 4, you could construct a perpendicular and bisect your original line and create an L. But there's an infinite number of L's on either side. So that in itself is a bit of a mystery. But again, it creates, when you do the 90 degrees, then you begin to really start to understand more about what it is that lies outside, and that is that circle. And so as we went into the break, what I was mentioning was that you have the point on that number line in our linear thinking basket, and that we could say this is intelligence, all right? This is where intelligence dwells, is in the linear. But there's something else, and that is the circle. And so the Masons put their little drop their compass point there, and they make the circle around it. But of course, the Masons have learned from the Egyptians learned from somebody before them, and so on. We understand these things, and we can track its progress by looking at the symbolism of all of the various cultures, tongues, tribes, and creeds on the planet. But so the idea then, again, we're looking at intelligence and intuition, or intuition being synonymous with instinct. For the intelligent, it stands on that center of the number line and looks out. And what it's trying to do is it's making tools of indefinite and varying manufacture. They make tools for everything. All right, the intelligence makes tools for everything. And as we said before, they don't always need necessarily be physical tools like a saw and a hammer and things like that. They can also be mental constructs. We say that it's spring, it's fall, it's so on. So there's that. And then there's the circle. And so now when we look up from the number line and we take a small segment of that circle, we perceive it to be straight. That's because the vector is so short from point A to point B that it appears to be virtually a straight line. But on a great curve, on the great circle, we actually start to see that our infinite number line begins to wrap back around, and it actually connects, and now we transition. We transition from the infinite to the eternal.
Uh-huh.
Are you with me?
Yeah.
So you have a ray that goes infinitely in either direction, but it eventually comes around to the eternal. And so when we think about the left and right politics, as we can see today, the left and the right now have gone so far to the left that they are actually back to back with the right, and they become the eternal, infinite, man questioning his existence. And so they no longer have any relevance in the system. They need to go out of the way and let us rejoin the eternal without the spirit of division that no longer serves any purpose. It's a tool that is now can be ready to be set aside. But we go up and we stand on the outside, stand up on that circle, if you can, and you look back now towards the center. Now we're living in the land of intuition. Now we're living in the land of instinct. And we're looking back and we're looking at the center. And we can modify, we can influence the center through intuition and instinct. And intuition or instinct is perfected as a faculty, even constructing organized instruments, whereas intelligence is perfected as the faculty of making and using unorganized instruments. And so looking at our language and the development of language, these are all instruments that we've made. And we've trucked these instruments along from the very beginning. You go back, just to use the Bible as an example, because so many have read it, and you look at the Adamic principle. And this is where God said to Adam, Name everything.
Yeah.
And man does. He loves to do it. You got a dog, his name's going to be Sparky. He doesn't like that name. He might not even come to that name. In fact, he might run away from home in shame. But you call him Sparky, and so he becomes Sparky, okay? And so all of his life he has to carry this tag. And we name everything. So we have this naming thing, and we invent all kinds of things, and we bake different kinds of cakes, and we make different kinds of omelets and whatnot. But this is us working from the level of intelligence. Intuition is something entirely different. And again, we use the example of the wasp and the caterpillar. The wasp never seen the caterpillar before in his life. The wasp only just recently started to live, but he's at his maturity, he's looking to reproduce. He wants to procreate. And so he seeks out this particular caterpillar. God only knows why, because he knows why, because intuition told him to seek it out, and he knows just exactly where to sting it. There's 3 nerve centers on the back that have to be pierced in order to semi-paralyze but not kill the caterpillar. And then he has to slice open the caterpillar and in precisely the right place and deposit his eggs, because the wasp larvae feeds on the living flesh of the caterpillar. Now, there's no way that he could have, come out of the box hardwired with that, but what it came through intuition and instinct. Has nothing to do with intelligence.
There's another thing that springs to mind here. If you were talking about lines and circles, right? Lines being intelligence and circles being intuition, but you could also see them as male and female, and sex comes into play here.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely. You're right on the money.
Ploing, ploing, I hear. I don't know what that was, but
I don't either. Something just went down, but it's
anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so you're absolutely right in that. Is that there's a generative principle, and then there's we can think of it from the standpoint of a field of fertile soil and a seed. And so this little seed looks like the dot in intelligence. This little seed looks like the dot on our number line, and the fertile field looks like our circle. And I mean to tell you, and as you well know, there's so much mystery writing and all of this stuff that it could fill volumes and has. So. We can say exactly there's a male idea in this and there's a female idea in this, but together there's this unity of the circle. Now, from that, then let's talk about discontinuity and unity. We think in discontinuity. We think in little parts. We think in, to use IT terminology, we think about packets of information.
You describe discontinuity as something that has a beginning and an end, but like short in time, or
yes, they're in. Let's look at a screen on the computer, for instance, and you've got all these little pixels. It's the little squares, okay? And there's just a bazillion, depending on your screen's resolution. There's a bazillion of these little squares, and so discontinuity. We make tools. And we've got all these little tools. Intelligence may not have any idea of what to do with all of these tools, but it's through the intuition that we start to build up these organized instruments.
Yeah, obviously.
Well, see,
like
because
look at the body.
Yeah, exactly. Look at the body and use that. And again, thinking about it from the standpoint of evolution. You start with a single cell, and J.J., our caller, called in and wanted to know, what 16th week of the trimester? Well, no. It all starts at the very moment of conception, which is the moment that spark starts to head away from the inanimate into the animate. And so immediately, these two processes begin to work together, intelligence and intuition.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're coming up on the break. Welcome back, everybody. This is Orion Talk Radio, micro1650am.com. I'm your host, Walter, and I'm talking with Willaim Roberts. William, you do a radio show. Could you please tell the listeners where the people can find you?
Well, they can certainly find me right here on the Orion Talk Radio Network and heard over Micro 1650 AM out of Tonawanda, Monday through Friday at 9 o'clock a.m. Central Time, 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time. But I'm on the Oracle Broadcasting Network, and I've been on now. I'm just starting my third year on Oracle and with Oracle. And, of course, before that it was with Revolution Broadcasting, and before that Republic Broadcasting. But the title of the broadcast, the whole theme, is Becoming Vocal Local, or Become Vocal Local is the title. And so I style it as the home of philosophical radicalism. But altogether, too, infrequently can we ever have a conversation like we're having this morning, largely because people are not really ready to have their paradigms tampered with or their belief systems tampered with. But unfortunately, unless we're ready to actually transcend, if you will, not to get into the New Agey stuff, but unless we're ready to transcend some of the garbage and the baggage that we've been carrying with us for thousands of years, we're going to find ourselves in an increasingly compromised position going forward, because those people who are actually the wire pullers and the string pullers that have laid out a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, a 20-year plan, a 30-year plan, they're well aware of what we're talking about here this morning.
Yes, absolutely. So Become Vocal Local is also a call to action, which I support wholeheartedly. If we just inform ourselves and do nothing, and that's not going to help anybody.
No, it's not. You know, the idea is like in my Johnson's, I think it's a 1756 dictionary, one of the words that I found interesting was bookful. And bookful is like, it's synonymous in that day with lumberhead. And so too often we become bookful, and we have all these sheaves of paper like boards on our head, and we go around with all of this book knowledge, and we never combine it with action. And so, you know, knowledge can be and is, you know, said to be powerful, but knowledge is powerful only when it's combined with action. It's not sufficient to know a thing. You must do the thing that you know. And so that's what becoming vocal local is. It's taking it right to the source and putting it in their face and bringing truth to power. The idea is show me your facts. Show me the facts, show me your law, and show me the evidence. Otherwise,
and I'm glad that you do, but and there's a plus point to getting information, because no matter how you do it, how you get your information, it changes your behavior, even in a game. Absolutely. And so in real life, it works like that also, and the information that you get will change your behavior. But I want to get back to this discontinuity. Do I pronounce that right?
Discontinuity and unity. And they're very, very interesting topics, because again, if we think about this discontinuity and the intelligence that has, come up with us over the eon, these are like little packets of information. And by themselves, they're not really all that valuable to us. But when they're combined together in organization, when they are brought into or constructed into organized instruments, you have all these little cells. Individually, they mean something, but when they're put together, they become the liver or a spleen or the pineal gland or a brain. You see, and so it's not so much the little piece. It's when it's been organized, and that is what we get out of the instinct. That's what we get out of intuition, is putting them together into some meaningful expression. These are the things that you don't know why you're doing it. You're just doing it. But when they're all there, and you may even be led, like Edison. How many thousands of experiments were failures, but he just knew intuitively that if he kept on the direction that he was going, he was going to come up with a light bulb.
But this idea of discontinuity, does it have? Do I think of destruction or?
Well, that is very good. Now we brought out the Koch brothers the other day, Fred Koch. And he was real strongly influenced by not only Marxism and things like that, but initially a man named Schumpeter. And Schumpeter came up with this idea of creative destruction. Interesting, you wouldn't think that they would work that way. Creative destruction. So discontinuity could be considered creative destruction. Now, what do we mean? This is like rendering down into parts, taking things down. This is part of the problem with the number line and our way of looking at things. Science just keeps cutting it into smaller and smaller and smaller parts. Creative destruction. It just gets smaller and smaller. We know how to talk about with great erudition. We can discuss a gnat's eyebrow. We don't know why the gnat has an eyebrow, but we just know it and we understand it and we can explain it and we write thesis on it and teach it in academia. We don't know why it's there. Another one is Causidière, back at the time of the French Revolution, the time that Auguste Comte was writing, the time that Karl Mordecai Marx was writing, came Causidière, a physiologist. I believe he was one that said, gentlemen, your materials are disorder, and from these we must build order. There's discontinuity. Your materials are disorder. From chaos comes order. Out of the chaos comes the order. And what is the creative principle there is the intuition and the instinct, and the intelligence is in the process of finding, oh, look, a brick. If I could just make enough bricks, I could build a wall.
So problem, reaction, solution also has to do with an understanding of how humans use intelligence and intuition.
Well, this is why I turned the Hegelian dialectic on its head, and I always start with the synthesis.
Yeah, that's because that's where it starts.
I wanted the wall. I didn't want the brick. I wanted a hole. I didn't want a drill bit.
Yeah. From a culture creation standpoint of view, you also start from the solution.
Yes. You have to, then again, go back and look at it. We very carefully research our past, our history. Then we visualize that future. We imagine, we intuit the future that we want to live in at what time. Then we find ourselves in the present, like on that diving board, always falling forward into that future. Okay? So discontinuity is one thing, unity is another. Now, when we start out with this intelligence, we're going to start out with intelligence, and we're going to draw a line through our point, and then we're going to cut it up into all these little pieces. That's intelligence working. But what the intelligence doesn't perceive is that it's a unity, it's a circle.
Yeah.
It's like the Mobius strip. It's a figure 8 turned on its side. It's a line without end. Okay? And so now one of the reasons why organizations like the Council for National Policy and Tim LaHaye and those get together is because they really don't want the people to start thinking the way we're talking this morning. Because if people did, they would no longer accept the Christian conservative right and the radical extremist left. because they would realize that they were just back to back on the same circle. No one would go, oh, evil, evil, evil. Oh, good and benevolent man. Why, it's exactly the same. You cannot have any experience of the blessed life without understanding the evil life. You can't have any understanding of the light unless there is the presence of the dark. You can't, or vice versa. You can't feel hot without cold. You won't understand love without hate. It's unity.
Yep. We see that also here in the Dutch politics. The extreme left, or what's left of it, and the extreme right, if they could form a formation together and make a party here, you know.
Exactly. And I've called this the spirit of division. And it's very clever. But, you know, in the Bible, again, because a common reference point, people can go get it off the shelf and look at it. And shame on you if you don't have one or haven't read it, folks. But anyway, just go, you know, of all things, you know. But go get it and look at it, and you'll see that I think it's in Matthew 12 and 24 where he says, and this is about, you know, he's talking about Beelzebub. But, he's saying, you know, will Beelzebub cast out Beelzebub? No, of course he wouldn't. You know, a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. A house divided against itself, or a house divided against itself will surely fall. A kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. The idea is if you pit the men against the women, oh, that's radical, isn't it? That's women's liberation. You know, you pit the man against the woman. You pit the children now against their parents. Why, the whole house falls down.
Yeah. The family is so much under attack, it's unbelievable. People, you've been listening to Orion Talk Radio. We're going to our last segment of the second hour. Be right back. Good morning, everybody. I am your host, Walter Hendricks, talking to you from the Netherlands. And before the show ends, because this is the last segment, I want to thank everybody for listening. Otherwise, it would be kind of useless and senseless to make this radio. And I want to thank William for coming on the show and making it a very interesting 2 hours. William, thanks a lot for taking time, even on a Sunday, to come on with me.
Well, it's always my pleasure. I love getting on the radio, and I like to visit with you, Walt, because you do understand some of the things that I'm trying to come to. And we come to the airwaves with lots of the news, you know, and I try and be very selective about the news that I bring, largely because the news articles that I'm bringing out are in sync with the inferences that I've made about the organisms and the systems that are actually happening and operative in this infinity of space that we live in. But closing out the idea here that we're talking about, once again, all these parts and pieces do, in my mind, work together. And unfortunately, this is not where we begin. We no longer follow the trivium and the quadrivium in education. It's all see-say. Run, spot, run, run, and so on. And so that really defeats the purpose of education. And if we were to, again, withdraw from some of these systems that continuously drive us into the linear and obfuscate or obscure the circular, I think we would be best served. So looking into that future then that we want to be in, we need to understand that intellect has almost an unlimited power of decomposing according to any law and recomposing into any system all that exists around us. And yet at the same time, it's part of a greater unity, and we have the ability to bring ourselves back into the reality that we are not separate one from the other, that we are in effect all part of the same creation. And that was the way that it was intended by our Creator to live. And so rushing over here to, support the overthrow of Gaddafi's regime, or going down into Yemen and getting a choke point on the Red Sea, and getting involved in the Gaza Strip or Jordan, or whatever madness they're, rolling out at any one time, is so antithetical to being human that it's laughable, and yet at the same time it's tragic because we're seeing it happening. We're right into Dante's comedy here. But so all of these things do work together, and I think that when we talk about becoming vocal local, Saul, is the idea of internalizing this information. It absolutely has to become part of us as we move forward. When we go out into, let's say, a public hall or a public meeting, and we are absolutely opposed to the Nature Conservancy coming in and locking up a watershed or something like that. If you speak like a timid mouse on the floor at a meeting like that, if you only have just a little smattering, a little corner of understanding, those that are in the know will quickly perceive that. They'll isolate it out, then do an ad hominem attack and discredit your entire testimony, and you'll be reduced down to just a mumbling stumble as you go back to your seat in shame. But if you can actually internalize this stuff and then come in and, like, the watchman on the wall, in a bold voice, you come in and you boldly speak the truths to power with your evidence and your facts and your law in hand and present it in that fashion, then the dumbfounded are the dumbfounds that sit up, the dumbfounders of the trust that are sitting up there on the dais. And it really puts the shoe on the other foot.
Yeah. A friend of mine sometimes uses his common sense when he has to attend to meetings for counties and stuff. And now he has a different position. He's moved up the ladder a bit, but before, and he's still saying the same thing. Before that time, he was just, in other people's eyes, a rat catcher, right? He's catching rats to the day because they nibble the holes in the dikes and we would flush under. But he's very intelligent. He's a chess master, and so he comes up with his ideas and refutes. And then the head guy that is making the decision there, he says, "Well, I'm sorry, but we're not here to discuss your ideas." That's all he can say, because he can't give any argument to what has been laid on the table.
Well, that's unfortunately the process. And again, if you look back and look at this idea of this trivium, we begin in grammar. Words have meanings. Their meanings are important. How they're used, the different senses and terms, those are all very important. Understanding how to diagram a sentence. What are prepositional phrases? What is an adjectival? What it's modifying? What's the subject here? And I mean, we can't understand law and we can't understand legislation. We can't even understand the newspaper if we are deficient in our grammar. So that's a foundation. And then to that we add dialectic or logic. What's the logical argument? What is the hypothesis that you're advancing? And then from that, then we go out to the next level, and that's rhetoric. Understanding how to present this information in an oratorical fashion, whether you follow Cicero or whomever,
Doesn't matter. Yeah, there's a nice philosophical rule that I learned, and it says that if you don't understand something, then you can't explain it. And if you can't explain something, then obviously you don't understand it. Yes. So there's the rhetoric. But something came to mind about this time and space and linear and intelligence. They all work together, but do they all somehow fall under what we call natural law?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's
now I'm understanding.
This is one of the reasons why I started on a lot of this, is because of that revelation that I had now back in 2004. At midnight on June the 30th of 2004, where it came to my mind this thought, and there is an all-out war raging between legal positivism and the natural law, that in the rise of statism, the state has arrogated unto itself all of the natural law, returned as codified, statutory, regulated privileges, taxable, licensable, and revocable. You see? And so what they give with one hand, they can take back. But under legal positivism, where whatever the prince says, you fill in the prince, Bernhardt or bury the usurper, whatever the prince says has the force and effect of law. But we, the people, are lost slayed for a lack of knowledge when we don't understand that with legal positivism, it's absolutely dependent upon voluntary compliance. The people must give their assent to these edicts. They have no basis in law. Why? Well, because any law that cannot be enforced will not be enforced. And if it cannot be enforced against we the people, then it falls to deaf ears. The Obamacare falls away. No one ever goes with it. Social Security, no one ever goes with it. The Internal Revenue Service, everyone turns their back and walks away. Fiat dollar, central banking, to hell with them all. Say no. Become vocal local.
People here in the Netherlands are dumbfounded. They think that Americans that are against this treatment for when you're ill. What do you call this? Obamacare?
Yes, that's the popular name.
They say you must be out of your mind if you're against that. It's normal here, everybody pays insurance. They're stealing your money, people.
Socialism is like being pregnant. It's hard to be a little bit of a socialist, but if you wanted to look at it just from the standpoint of the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, if there's anyone out there that doubts that they're a practicing communist, please just take the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto and compare it with your life. We're all communists.
Yeah, we are here also. The European Union is one communistic yuck.
Well, they're building a new one now around the Mediterranean basin. It'll be known as the Mediterranean Union, but they want to make it a young, spontaneous Twitter revolution, and it's certainly far not from that. You can go up on the internet, just go to Wikipedia and type in Mediterranean Union. You'll find that it's the Club of Rome, it's Soros, it's the same old gang, and they're just bringing out another one, but just another.
Yeah, and to break some geopolitics, if I can, there's also the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and it's not like they are like adversaries. These people all work together in this global economy, so to speak. Yes. It's not really an economy, but okay, there you go.
Well, they're hooked on OPM, other people's money, and until we can get over that, until we can get them cured of that disease, there's not going to be any relief.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're coming up on the end of the show. It's 7:57 here on my clock. So I'm glad I got the time to thank you once again, William.
Well, thank you.
And maybe we can do this again in a half year's time or something.
Be glad to.
If you like, yeah. I'd like to thank all the people in the chat. There were 10K and Angel and Destroyer and James and Joe Friday and Ruth and Anon. All welcome and thank you for chatting. This was Orion Talk Radio, Micro 1650 AM. If you can, support this radio station, because it's the only radio station that you can find that will give you some real news and information. Okay. Now I don't hear the break music yet, so what do I say?
At this point, we usually and typically juggle cats or chainsaws.
This is right. Here's the encore.
Here it is.
By the way, you guys did a great show today.
Thank you all. Till next week, people. Bye-bye.